minister, and one of the reasons that the Sunday school church is doing so well and the youth group is washing cars and lots of other things, and she has a marvelous message for us today. Reverend Kay?
Thank you. Well, Ernest Holmes just told us that the divine message for mankind is freedom, that God does not think that we should be bound by anything. Bound by anything. How many of us, though, live in prisons of our own making every day? For example, let me ask you, how many of you are sitting in the same seat that you almost always sit in when you come in church? Now stop and think about that. You know, sometimes the way to shake things up, sometimes the way to go into a new way of thinking and doing is by doing something different. Doing something different that makes you feel a little uncomfortable, just a little uncomfortable. For instance, fold your arms. Everybody fold their arms? Now fold them the other way. Does that feel funny? Does that feel funny? But you know, when you want a new idea to come in, fold your arms the other way. It helps the brain open up to thinking in a new way. And isn't that what we want? Don't we want more freedom in our lives so that we can go out and do more of what we would like to do without the drama in our lives, without the fear in our lives, without worry about whether somebody is going to say something and we're going to break down somehow, either in a tantrum, and I call it a tantrum, it doesn't matter how old you are, or whether it is simply just separating yourself from everybody because of fear. Because of fear. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what really is freedom. What really is freedom? When you stop and think about it, are you free this very moment? And in what ways? And how? Now, freedom can come in a lot of different ways. Freedom to make noise when we feel like making noise. And yet many of us would be really afraid to express that same sort of freedom in public. If you go out if you go out someplace and you fall down, do you allow yourself to cry, or do you be embarrassed, get yourself up, act as if nothing happened, and go your way? And then you get home and you go, ugh, because you've really hurt yourself. How often do we do that to ourselves instead of allowing ourselves the freedom to feel the hurt then, to take care of it, and do what we need to do? Just a little example, just a little example. At the earlier service, I told about what has been going on this month for me. And it's really been an interesting month because it has been full of drama. It has been full of showing me where I'm not free, where I have put the bars of my own prison around me, and forgotten that, you know what, I can walk out anytime I choose to. So some of the things that have been going on for me is I started off the month having to have eye surgery. Well, when you have eye surgery, they say afterwards you cannot bend down, you cannot let your blood pressure get too high, you aren't supposed to lift anything over 10 pounds. Now tell me, how many people carry around a 10-pound scale to see if they're lifting 10 pounds or not? I think my purse weighs that. Anyway, so it really kind of put this restriction around me. And then I added the extra thing of a little drama here and there. I mean, after all, we can't have something like that without a little drama, right? And so for me, it was worry about children's church. Who's going to do it? What was going to go on? And I have to thank everybody on the practitioner team and on my children's church team, because they pulled together and they took care of that. And the kids had a good time and didn't know the difference. But it was that worry, that fear, that can be subtle, that can be that drama. Now that's kind of subtle. Later this month, after going to camp and that, I come home and we find that there's a problem with my mom. Now she's 86 years old, so you take any problem seriously. And I was very scared, but I stayed very calm around her. I called the doctor and we had an appointment in 2 days. But I allowed myself to get really scared. Now I can blame it on being tired. I can blame it on a lot of other things, but the truth is, for me, it went back to my father. This fear, because my father died of pancreatic cancer. And I was afraid of my mom going through the same thing. Fortunately, we took her to the doctor, and the doctor said, nothing's wrong. Everything's okay. So a part of me went, oh, thank goodness, and a part of me got mad. Have you ever had that happen? Kind of got mad that I went through all that fear and everything, and then there was nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. But I allowed myself to step back and go, well, who created that fear? I did. Who bought into it lock, stock, and barrel? I did. Who couldn't wait to see what the doctor said? Me. So I have to go back to, I created this prison that I was in. And while I was in that prison, you know what happened to my thinking? It stopped. It stopped. It was like I could not handle one more thing, and my thinking just kind of froze. Ever been there? It has happened to me a couple times. Do I want that to happen again? Can everybody hear me, by the way? If you can't, please raise your hand, because we have a little audience here. And so when my thinking stopped, I wasn't able to logically say, well, this could be absolutely nothing. Let's wait till we see the doctor and take care of it. Instead, I was just really seated in that fear, really seated there. And it was uncomfortable. It was not enjoyable. Did I help myself or my mother? Not in the least bit. I didn't help them by being there. Now, I tried to stay very calm around my mother, but still, I was in fear then about that. I was in fear then about youth that I had to take care of. I was in fear about children's church I had to take care of, about my other responsibilities with my family and that. I mean, it's like it all crowded in. I put myself in a really tight cell for those couple days. Very, very uncomfortable. Do we want to live there? I want to be free of that. And so I choose to take this opportunity to look at how I can change that in my life, so that if something comes up again, I don't immediately go to that place of fear, because that place of fear really went back to something else that wasn't pertinent at the time. So, in order to move into this new place, this new freedom that we all want, we have to figure out how and why. Why do we want to move to that new freedom? Number one, we don't want to put up with being in the cages anymore. The United States kind of takes its freedom seriously. We want to be able to have that. So let me ask you, how free of movement are you? How free do you have to move where you want to move? You might say pretty good, huh? Pretty good. Well, I'll tell you something. What if you can't move around. I have a friend who doesn't have one leg. She has trouble moving around. And she has to either use her wheelchair or crutches or whatever to get around. And it can, and steps are almost impossible for her. So what happened to her freedom of movement? Freedom of movement. And we might think that we're all very free, but let me ask you, can you go into the White House anytime that you choose to? I don't think so. I don't think so. Can you go into almost any manufacturing place without an invitation or an escort? There's a lot of places that we cannot go into. You wouldn't go into somebody's home that you don't know. Even if you were not planning on doing anything, you just wanted to see it. Well, we don't do that. We don't do that, right? We don't have that freedom. And yet we put that restriction on ourselves, and I don't advise doing that, please. Don't try it with anybody, except maybe your relatives. But we have a lot of restrictions that we don't recognize. As I said before, we've got some emotional restrictions which keeps us from doing some things, like that child screaming in the middle of an audience. And please, don't anybody do that today. Now, what about mental? You think you're free mentally? You think you're free mentally? When you were a child and you were going to school, did you have any fear about being too smart or not being smart enough? Did you think that, that you could keep up with things, or were you afraid? And that fear translates into things that you restrict yourself about now. Maybe an area that you'd like to try, but you're afraid to because you couldn't maybe live up to your expectations of some sort. Take, for instance, painting. Many people might want to paint, but maybe they don't because they haven't had the lessons, they haven't had, the experience of it before, and so they shy away from it. Well, let's go one a little better. What about dancing? Going out and dancing and movement. A lot of people would shy away from that because they haven't had the expertise, they think. And they think they're too old, too big, too small, too heavy, too light to do it. And so we mentally restrict ourselves on top of everything. Like we don't have enough already with the emotional and the physical, right? So we mentally restrict ourselves. We even restrict ourselves spiritually. How many of us really know that we are one with God? That we really have all that God has? That we are the love, the joy, the peace, the success, the abundance that God is. You know something? I can tell you none of us do. And how do I know that we don't have it really, really well? We have degrees of it. It's because you're still sitting here. If you were really grounded in it, you wouldn't need to be here anymore. But we're still here. We're still learning. We're still in that process. And there's nothing wrong with the process. There's nothing wrong with the learning in that. We want to continue that. We want to keep learning because learning allows us to move into greater freedom. Learning allows us to move into greater consciousness of our unity with Spirit. But if we stop our learning, then we stagnate. And we have all seen people who have stopped with the learning, stopped being, stopped living. And they become shells of fear. And none of us want to be that way, do we? None of us. And so the Ernest Holmes has put together a whole lot of stuff that helps us move into new freedom. And I'm going to really push classes. I got to see all those wonderful people who were up here taking classes, and I'm really going to push classes because classes allows us to move deeper into the understanding of what it's all about. Classes help us to look at some of those things that maybe by ourselves is a little hard to look at, is a little hard to get to, those habits of thinking, those habits of action, those habits of awareness. And that's what the classes do. And as I said earlier, I don't think there's anybody who has taken a class here who hasn't been changed. And I don't mean for the worse, but changed for the better. And changed sometimes very, very dramatically. If you ask around, there are some stories in this church of people being on verge of dying even, and having miraculous things happen. Why is that? It's because they changed their thinking. They allowed themselves to move and change. So classes are really important. The other thing that's really important that classes help do is to teach us treatment. Now, along with treatment, I'm going to tell you there's another thing that has to happen, and that's forgiveness. Oh, that's a dirty word sometimes. A lot of times people don't want to forgive a certain person especially because they caused all our problems. I know it. I experienced it. You know, my dad or my mom raised me to be this way. And how can I forgive them what they did to me as a child? Well, you know, everybody is a reflection of everybody else. That's the good news and the bad news. That means that the person who you think is really great and loving and wonderful is a reflection of you, as well as the person you think hurt you and really is rotten. And so one of the things we have to do with that is to forgive both of them. Not just one of them. We forgive both of them. We forgive both of them because that way we don't keep attached to them, either one of them. So we forgive our loving relatives, our loving people in our lives, and we forgive those who weren't so loving. And all the time, who are we really forgiving? We're forgiving ourselves. We're opening our hearts up to life. We're opening ourselves up to spirit, to allow that spirit to come in and fill us with love and understanding and peace and joy. But it can't do that as long as we hold in place something that will not let us forgive. Will not let us forgive. So the other big tool that we use that religious science has brought forth is treatment. And many of you may know that as affirmative prayer. And affirmative prayer is really important. It is so important that you can say it in one word. Can anybody tell me what that one word is? Thank you. Thank you is one of the best treatments you can do. But you know something? You got to feel it. You got to feel it. You got to feel that thankfulness in the moment. You got to feel it from the toes up through your head and out into the universe. Now we do offer kind of a structure too. We have 5 steps that we kind of teach people. And why do we teach people the 5 steps? Because many people have come from places where they just did rote prayers and didn't really know how to put a prayer together that is spur of the moment or authentic. And many people have come from places where they bargained or they begged. Most of us as children have had the prayer, you know, oh God, please get me that new bike. If you do, I promise to make my bed for the rest of my life. And so we go back to that. We go back to that. So what I'm going to tell you about treatment or affirmative prayer is really important. You are not asking God to change something. You are not asking God to come in and give you something special. You aren't asking God to have a magic wand and tap you in the head and say, you're okay, or you're not. God doesn't do that. God just says, here is everything, and it is yours already, but you have to accept it. You have to accept it. So we easily do that. We do that by recognizing that there is what I call God, and if you don't like the word God, use whatever you choose to, because I have not noticed that God is real picky. And God doesn't care what name you call God. And God isn't a human that has that sort of attachment or anything. And I try to follow that. If you call me anything, I'll come. Just remember to call me. But we have to recognize that there is something greater than us, something that is already there. You can call it universal energy, you can call it unlimited potentiality, you can call it a tree, you can call it the person in front of you if you want. And then we have to recognize that we have unity with that we aren't separate in any way, that we are one with Spirit, that all that Spirit is, the love, the joy, the energy, is what we are. It is in us already. It has been given to us to use. And then the third step is acceptance, and we accept what it is that we want. Now, if you want a new car, we aren't saying treat for the car per se. We're going to ask you to treat for what the car would give you emotionally. So if the car emotionally would give you security because you could get from one place to another and the freedom to do so, that's what you would treat for, is security and freedom. Why? Because then it gets to seep into all the little areas of your life. And you will find that not just do you get the car, but you will find that you get the other areas of your life awakened and alive. That's why we treat that way. The fourth step is forgiveness. Excuse me, Thanksgiving. And to me, the two kind of go together, forgiveness and Thanksgiving. And because we need to give thanks to open up our hearts. God doesn't need thanks. God is perfectly okay, has already given us everything, just like a parent doesn't give a child a toy and then expect them to constantly say thank you. They expect them to play with it and to have fun with it. Well, God is the same way, but we have to open our hearts, and giving thanks allows us to open our hearts and to recognize. The last part is releasing, and we release that which we have. We release it so it can continue to work in our lives. Just like a plant, if we plant that seed and we pull it up to see if it's growing, guess what happens? It quits growing. And you can't really replant it very easily. So we want to do our treatment and let it go and know that it's going to happen. Now there's a wonderful little story out of this book, which I picked up, and this is by John Waterhouse, who is the president of the Centers for Spiritual Living, the whole organization. And he wrote this little book called 5 Steps to Freedom, and he's got a really neat little story in it. And the story is about an African chief. And he's in he's in front of his hut, and he's got the fire going, and he's drinking his stuff, and just enjoying life, having that moment where he can just enjoy. And 3 young men come up to him, 3 young warriors, and they come up and they challenge him. They challenge him. And he goes, well, okay, I'll accept your challenge, but you have to do it my way. I get to pick what the challenge is. And he looks over and he sees this bundle of wood, and he tells the warriors that they each get to try one time to break this bundle of wood. Well, the first one takes the bundle of wood and tries to break it with his foot and snapping it, right? It didn't work, not with the bundle of wood. The second one props it up on a tree limb and jumps on it. Still doesn't break. He just kind of bounces off. The third one sees a big branch and puts it over the branch and tries to pull it down and snap it that way. But does it snap? No. And so they finally go to the chief and they say, well, we couldn't do that. It's impossible. It's impossible. And the chief goes, well, I can do it. And he gets up and he walks over and he unties the bundle and he breaks each piece of wood individually. Now, why am I telling you this story? Because if you try to change your life in one lump sum, it's not going to work. I will tell you right now, most people cannot turn over that leaf so completely that it changes their whole life. But you can change a piece of it at a time. You can take a part where you feel that you are imprisoned and start working on that one section. And when you do, you will find that it kind of spreads out to the rest of your life and start changing things. So it isn't an impossible task to get rid of that prison around yourselves. It isn't an impossible task to start living life fully and completely and to become what you want to be. And so I bless each one of you and challenge you to go forth and do that sort of thing. And if you'll join me, we'll do a treatment. So there is only one God, one Spirit, one essence of goodness in the universe. And that essence of goodness is so complete, so total, that it is everything that I can imagine and everything that I can't imagine. And I recognize right now that I am one with that Spirit. And not only am I one with the Spirit, but each person in this room and beyond is also connected with Spirit and me. We're all one. And I don't quite have the words for that total unity, but I know it exists. And I know that the only time it doesn't exist is if I put that illusion of separation in there. And so I dismiss the illusion. I created it, I can dismiss it. I let it go and recognize my unity to the fullest of my ability. And so I accept right now that the prison I have encased myself in is as easily walked out of as opening a door and doing it. I accept for myself the truth of who I am. And I am love and joy and peace. I am all the attributes of Spirit right now and right here. And as I live within the attributes of Spirit, live in the love and joy, the bars around me disappear. I forgive those in the past, I forgive those in the present, and most of all, I forgive myself. I forgive myself for allowing this prison to be built. And I congratulate myself for letting it disappear. I know right now for each person in this room that things are changing, that life is evolving, that the internal love and peace is expressing in ways of health, in joy, in abundance, in truth. And I give thanks for that. I give thanks. For what I know for others is also the truth for me. And as I release this treatment, I know it is done. It is done. And together we say, and so it is. Thank you. New
Freedom. Let's claim it now. This is the time when we get a chance to recognize our blessings and to share